Hey guys. Welcome back. I want to start this one with a moment. A very specific moment. And I want you to really picture it. It's a Tuesday night in February. It's 11:47 p.m. A 13-year-old girl is in her bedroom, in the dark, and she's been awake for hours working up the courage to do something. And she finally does it. She picks up her phone. She opens her text messages. And she texts her mom. 2 words. Just 2 words to start. The 2 words that people who have been carrying something too heavy for too long use when they finally decide they cannot carry it alone anymore. Mom. Help. That text message, 2 words, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, is what brought down Evan Calloway. And before this video is done, I'm going to tell you everything about who he was, what he did, and how a community that trusted him completely had to reckon with the fact that they had been wrong about him for 4 years. This is a hard one. I want to be upfront about that. The subject matter is serious, and I'm going to handle it that way. But it's also a story that needs to be told. Because the people who fight back against this kind of thing deserve to have their courage recognized. And because understanding how predators like Evan Calloway operate is genuinely important for every parent, every teacher, every person in a position to protect kids. So, let's get into it. Claremont, Georgia. Small city in Cherokee County, about 45 minutes north of Atlanta. Population around 12,000. The kind of community that has a strong local identity, people know each other, care about each other's kids, show up for each other at games and fundraisers and church. The kind of community that, when someone becomes part of its institutional fabric, becomes a teacher, becomes a coach, embraces that person as one of their own. Evan Ross Calloway arrived at Claremont Middle School in the fall of 2018. He was 34. He had a master's degree in science education from the University of Georgia. He had 3 years of teaching experience from a school in Gainesville. His references were clean. His background check was clean. He interviewed well. The principal who hired him, a woman named Dr. Angela Whitfield, told reporters after his arrest that Calloway had been, in her words, exactly what we were looking for. Engaged. Enthusiastic. Student-focused. He was given a 7th grade science class and, in his 2nd year, an assistant coaching role for the school's track team. The track role was his idea. He had asked for it specifically. I want you to hold on to that detail. He asked for it specifically. What the community saw. What Claremont saw, from 2018 to 2022, was a teacher who was genuinely good at his job. His students' standardized test scores were consistently above the school average. He ran after-school science clubs. He organized a school-wide science fair in 2020 that the district superintendent attended and publicly praised. He showed up to students' sporting events even when it wasn't required. He knew every kid's name. Parents liked him. Actively, specifically liked him. Multiple parents had gone out of their way to email the administration with positive feedback about Mr. Calloway. He was mentioned in the school's parent newsletter 3 times in 3 years as a standout educator. He was nominated by the Parent-Teacher Association for the county's Teacher of Excellence Award in 2021. He was nominated by parents who trusted him with their children. This is the part of cases like this that is hardest to sit with. Because the parents weren't wrong to trust the version of Evan Calloway they were seeing. That version was real, the test scores were real, the science fair was real, the attendance at sporting events was real. But it was the surface of something much darker. And what was underneath it had been operating for 4 years. The double life. Okay. So I need to explain exactly what Calloway was doing, and I'm going to do this in a way that gives you the full picture without crossing into territory that serves no one. What investigators eventually documented through digital forensics, victim testimony, and communications records was a predatory system that Calloway had built and maintained with the same methodical attention he brought to his classroom. He used his position, his authority, and the trust of both students and parents to create access. He built relationships. He identified specific vulnerabilities: students who were struggling at home, students who needed extra attention, students who responded to adult approval in ways that he could exploit. He was deliberate about it. He was patient about it. He had a system. And at night, after the school day was done, after the track practice was over, after the science club was locked up, he used technology and private communication channels to pursue a set of activities that were criminal, predatory, and a direct betrayal of every parent, every student, and every colleague who had trusted him. He was, in the most precise sense of the word, a predator. Not a person who made bad choices. Not a person who crossed a line once in a moment of weakness. A predator who had constructed, deliberately, a professional life that gave him access to what he was hunting. I want to spend some real time here. Because it's easy, in cases like this, to get caught up in the perpetrator, in understanding the system he built, in the details of how he operated. And those things matter. But the people who were targeted by Evan Calloway are the reason this story gets told, and they deserve more than to be described as victims and moved past. So I'm going to tell you, in the responsible way I can, what these students and their families faced. The Cherokee County Sheriff's Office investigation, working alongside the FBI's Crimes Against Children Task Force, ultimately identified 6 individuals who had been targeted by Calloway over the 4 years of his tenure at Claremont Middle School. 5 were current or former students. One was a 22-year-old former student who had been in his class in Gainesville, who had been targeted while she was a minor and whose experience gave investigators the bridge to the Gainesville period and to the possibility that Calloway's behavior had predated even his arrival at Claremont. These 6 individuals were, and I want to be clear about this, completely different people. Different ages, different backgrounds, different family situations. There was no single vulnerability profile that Calloway was targeting. What investigators found was that Calloway was broadly opportunistic within the category of young people in his sphere of authority. He was looking for whoever was accessible. The common thread. What the 6 individuals' experiences had in common was a specific escalation pattern that the FBI's Crimes Against Children Task Force described, in their investigation report, as textbook grooming methodology. It started with attention. Positive, genuine feeling attention. Extra time, extra encouragement, extra recognition. The kind of attention that every student in every school is looking for from a teacher they respect. He made them feel seen. He made them feel special. He made them feel like the teacher actually saw who they were as individuals. Then came the gradual boundary erosion. Private communications that started innocuously and moved, increment by increment, toward inappropriate content. An awareness that these communications were private, that telling anyone would damage the relationship, would get him in trouble, would make things awkward. The management of a secret. And then, for some of those targeted, escalation beyond communication into actions that were criminal under Georgia and federal law. Now here's what I need you to understand about the secrecy piece specifically. Because this is something that I think a lot of adults don't fully process until they look at a case like this. These kids weren't silent because they wanted to be. They were silent because they had been systematically taught, by an adult they trusted, that silence was the only way to protect the relationship, to avoid consequences, to maintain what felt like, to a 12 or 13-year-old, something that had been meaningful before it became something else. Calloway didn't just exploit them. He made them feel responsible for the secret. That is one of the most insidious things about predatory grooming, and it's why the courage it takes to send a text that says "Mom, help" at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night is not small. It is enormous. And every single one of those 6 individuals who eventually spoke up, regardless of the timeline, regardless of what they felt they could and couldn't say, demonstrated a form of courage that I think most of us, honestly, can barely imagine. The families. The families of the students who had been targeted faced their own impossible situation. Several of them told investigators that they had noticed changes in their children: withdrawal, anxiety, disrupted sleep, declining grades, in periods that they had attributed to normal adolescent stress or, in some cases, to family circumstances that were coincidentally occurring at the same time. One parent, whose child had been in Calloway's class 2 years before the arrest, said in a victim impact statement that the hardest thing she had processed was not the anger at Calloway. It was the grief of recognizing that her daughter had been hurting for 2 years in her own house and she hadn't understood why. She said, "She was right there. Every morning, every night. And I couldn't see it. Because he had made sure she couldn't tell me." That parent's statement has stayed with me since I read it. Because it captures something true about this kind of crime that goes beyond the acts themselves, the way it spreads the damage outward, into families, into the relationships between parents and children who love each other, contaminating things that had nothing to do with what Calloway did and everything to do with the secret he made people keep. Okay. So let's go back to that Tuesday night in February. February 15, 2022. A 13-year-old student, I'm going to call her Mia, which is not her real name, had been in Calloway's class for 1 semester. She was not a student he had been targeting for a long period. She was someone he had identified recently. The escalation of his communication with her had been faster than his typical pattern. Investigators would later conclude this was because, by early 2022, Calloway had become more reckless, more urgent. The discipline that had characterized his earlier behavior was degrading. Mia had received a communication from Calloway that night that crossed a line so clear, so unambiguous, that even in the context of everything he had built up to make her feel like what was happening was normal, she knew immediately that it wasn't. She sat with it for 4 hours. And then she texted her mom. Her mother's name is Renata. Renata told the Cherokee County investigator who interviewed her that she had been asleep when the text arrived, that she had woken up to the notification, read it, and was in Mia's room within 30 seconds. She said she sat on Mia's bed for 2 hours, just listening, while Mia told her everything. The next morning, Renata called the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. She was connected to a detective who specialized in crimes against children. She had screenshots. She had the communication records. She had a daughter who was willing to talk. The investigation opened at 9:15 a.m. on February 16, 2022. The investigation begins. The Cherokee County Sheriff's Office detective assigned to the case, I'm going to use her title, Detective Sergeant Karen Hollis, because she has spoken publicly and her role in this case deserves recognition. Hollis had been working crimes against children cases for 9 years. She told reporters, after the arrest, that Calloway's case had a specific quality she recognized immediately. It had the signature of someone who had been doing this for a long time and who had gotten comfortable. The communication between Calloway and Mia, documented in screenshots and subpoenaed carrier records, was criminal on its face. Electronic enticement of a minor, a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. 2422. That gave Detective Hollis the federal hook she needed to bring in the FBI's Crimes Against Children Task Force, which she did within 48 hours of the investigation's opening. The task force moved fast. Calloway's devices, school-issued and personal, were identified as targets for warrants within the first week. The challenge was executing the warrants without tipping Calloway off. He was still in his classroom, still coaching track, still being nominated for teaching awards. And the investigators needed him to stay exactly where he was while they built the full picture. For 6 weeks, Evan Calloway walked into that school building every single morning while law enforcement was building the case that would end his life as he had known it. Every lesson he taught, every practice he ran, every parent who waved to him in the parking lot. All of it happening while the warrant clock was running. The digital evidence. The warrants executed on Calloway's devices produced what investigators described as a trove, a word they used specifically, and that reflects the volume of what they found. Calloway had used a layered approach to communication. He used apps that auto-deleted messages after reading, encrypted messaging platforms, and fake social media accounts designed to approach students outside the school's direct communication monitoring. He was sophisticated. He thought he had covered his tracks. What he had not fully accounted for was that cloud backups of some apps retained metadata, not always content, but timestamps, account activity, and in several cases partial content that had not been fully purged. The FBI's digital forensics team spent 3 weeks extracting every recoverable fragment from the devices and accounts. What they assembled was a 4-year digital record. Partial in places, but sufficient, more than sufficient, to establish the pattern, the timeline, and the identity of every individual Calloway had targeted. And during those 6 weeks, while forensics worked, Detective Hollis and her team were doing something equally important. They were reaching out carefully, with victim trauma specialists, with the specific sensitivity required, to the other individuals who had been targeted. They were letting them know they had been found. They were asking them if they wanted to speak. One by one, they said yes. March 14, 2022. A Monday morning. Calloway arrived at Claremont Middle School at 7:22 a.m., his usual time. He stopped at the front office to check his mailbox, the way he always did. He said good morning to the secretary. He walked to his classroom. He started setting up for first period. At 8:05 a.m., Detective Sergeant Hollis and 3 Cherokee County deputies, accompanied by 2 FBI agents, entered the school building. They were met by Principal Whitfield, who had been briefed 30 minutes earlier. She had been asked to provide access and to maintain a normal school environment until the moment of arrest. At 8:09 a.m., they entered Calloway's classroom. Students had not yet arrived. Calloway was at his desk. He looked up. He saw who was there. And according to Detective Hollis, his expression did not show surprise. She said it showed something else. She said it showed the expression of a person who has been waiting for a particular outcome and has arrived at the moment it is finally here. He stood up. He did not speak. He was handcuffed. He was walked out of the building he had taught in for 4 years through a side exit, not the front, not past the arriving students, a decision that Principal Whitfield and Detective Hollis had made together the night before, because there were children in that building and they did not need to carry that image. He was placed under arrest and transported to the Cherokee County Detention Center. He was charged, that morning, with 12 counts of state charges including aggravated stalking, computer exploitation of a minor, and sexual exploitation. The federal charges, 11 additional counts, were filed 3 days later by the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. 23 charges total. 4 years of documented predatory behavior. 6 identified victims. Telling the community. Now, here is the part of this story that I think about a lot. Because the arrest of Evan Calloway wasn't just the end of a criminal's freedom. It was the beginning of a community's reckoning. Principal Whitfield sent a message to all Claremont Middle School families at 10 a.m. on the morning of the arrest. It was careful, it was legally vetted, and it contained what it needed to contain. A teacher had been arrested, students would be supported, counseling resources were available, law enforcement would be the source of any further information about the charges. It did not need to say more than that for what followed to happen. The Claremont community response was complex. It moved through disbelief, then grief for the kids who had been hurt, bound up with the guilt of adults who had trusted him and recommended him. Then anger. The clean, appropriate kind. And then something that I think is the most important part of what a community can do in this situation, they turn toward the victims. The parent groups, the church communities, the neighborhood connections, the social infrastructure of a small to mid-sized Georgia city moved to support the families who had been affected. Not with fanfare. Just with the steady, practical, present-tense care of people who know how to show up. Okay. I have to be honest with you about something. Because this story is not just about Evan Calloway. It's also about the systems that were supposed to prevent someone like Evan Calloway from having 4 years of unsupervised access to children. And whether those systems worked. And where they didn't. The Cherokee County School District conducted an internal review of Calloway's hiring and supervision in the months after his arrest. The review was made public in redacted form as part of the civil proceedings that followed the criminal case. I've read through what's available. And here's what it showed. The hiring. Calloway's background check at the time of his 2018 hiring was clean. There was no criminal record. There were no civil actions. His references were from his Gainesville school and from 2 former colleagues. Those references were contacted. They said positive things. Nothing in the standard hiring process flagged him. What the review found was that the reference check had not contacted anyone from the informal community around his Gainesville posting: parents, student advocates, community members. It had contacted institutional sources. And institutional sources had either not known what was happening or had not been in a position to say it. Investigators later established that at least one informal complaint, apparent concern about Calloway's communication with a student, had been raised at the Gainesville school in 2017. It had been handled internally, at the school level, without escalation to HR or the district. Without documentation in any record that would have appeared in a background check. Without any consequence for Calloway beyond a verbal conversation. A verbal conversation. In 2017. At the school where he taught before Claremont. A parent raised a concern. It was handled with a conversation. No documentation. No record. And 18 months later, Evan Calloway was hired at a new school and handed a classroom of 7th graders and an assistant coaching role that he had specifically asked for. The Gainesville school's decision not to formally document that concern, whatever its reasoning, created the gap through which Calloway walked into Claremont. And I want to be really clear, the people at that school who handled the complaint informally almost certainly did not think they were creating that gap. They probably thought they were handling a sensitive situation appropriately, protecting a teacher's reputation on the basis of an unconfirmed complaint, following what they understood to be the standard approach. The standard approach was wrong. And it cost 6 kids their safety. What should have happened? This is the part of the video where I want to shift for a moment from what happened to what the people who work on child protection policy say should happen. The Darkness to Light organization, a US-based child sexual abuse prevention nonprofit, has been working with school districts for 20 years on implementing what they call Stewards of Children protocols, mandatory reporting training, documentation requirements for informal concerns, background check protocols that go beyond criminal records, and critically, a culture within institutions where reporting a concern is supported rather than stigmatized. The Cherokee County School District, in the aftermath of the Calloway case, adopted a revised protocol that includes mandatory formal documentation of any concern about staff conduct with students, regardless of whether the complaint is confirmed. The Gainesville district updated its policies similarly. Georgia's Department of Education issued guidance to all districts in the state on documentation requirements for staff misconduct concerns. These are not perfect solutions. No policy document prevents a determined predator on its own. But policies that require documentation, that require escalation, that leave a record, those policies mean that the gap Calloway walked through in 2018 is narrower. Not closed. Narrower. And narrower matters. Evan Calloway's trial opened in Cherokee County Superior Court in October 2022. He had pleaded not guilty to all charges, a decision his attorney had advised, and that, given the weight of the digital evidence and the testimony of 6 identified individuals, most legal observers characterized as strategically limited. The trial lasted 11 days. 4 of the 6 identified individuals testified. Their testimony was given with the assistance of victim advocates and under protective conditions. Some testified via closed-circuit video to avoid being in the same room as Calloway, a protection that Georgia law permits in cases involving child victims. I'm not going to detail the specifics of what they testified to. What I will tell you is that 4 people, some of them still teenagers, some of them now young adults, sat in a position of legal formality and told the truth about what Evan Calloway had done to them. And that is not a small thing. That is a profoundly brave thing. And I want it stated clearly. Mia testified on the 3rd day of trial. She was 14 by then, 13 months past the text message she had sent to her mother. Her mother sat in the gallery. Her victim advocate sat beside the stand with her. She testified for 2 hours. The prosecutor, a Cherokee County ADA named Victor Adeyemi, asked her, at the end of her testimony, whether she wanted to say anything directly. She looked at the jury. Not at Calloway. At the jury. She said, "I just want other kids to know that it's okay to tell someone. Even if you're scared. Even if you think no one will believe you. Tell someone. Because they will believe you. And it will stop." The courtroom was silent after that. The judge did not immediately ask if the defense wished to cross-examine. He let the silence exist for a moment. I think he understood that some silences are not interruptions. They are the point. The verdict and sentencing. The jury deliberated for 9 hours over 2 days. On October 24, 2022, they returned guilty verdicts on all 23 counts. At sentencing, in December 2022, Evan Calloway received 40 years in Georgia State Prison on the state charges, to be served concurrently with a federal sentence of 35 years on the federal charges. Given the federal sentencing structure and the state sentence, Calloway will serve a minimum of 30 years before any parole consideration. He will be in his late 60s, at minimum, before he leaves a correctional facility. He was also placed on Georgia's sex offender registry for life and stripped of his teaching certification permanently. The State Professional Standards Commission revoked his certificate within 48 hours of the verdict. He made no statement at sentencing. He looked at the floor. Evan Calloway walked into a school building for 4 years and called himself an educator. He receives nominations for teaching awards from parents who trusted him. He asked to coach track because it gave him access. He spent his nights doing what he spent his days pretending not to be. And he is going to spend the next 30 years in a cell thinking about the text message a 13-year-old girl sent her mother at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Okay. So, I do this at the end of every video that deals with something this heavy, and I'm going to do it here because I think it matters. I want to talk about what this case actually teaches us. Not just what happened, but what to do with having heard it. For parents. The most important thing this case tells parents is something that child protection researchers have been saying for a long time: the majority of child predators are not strangers. They are known adults. Trusted adults. People who have institutional credibility and established relationships with families. The specific grooming pattern that Calloway used, positive attention, private communication, escalating boundary erosion, enforced secrecy, is not unique to him. It is the standard operating model of predatory behavior in institutional settings. Knowing what it looks like matters. So here's what child protection experts recommend: talk to your kids, regularly and specifically, about the difference between comfortable and uncomfortable interactions with adults. Not scary conversations. Just open ones. Establish that there is no secret with an adult that is okay to keep from you. Check in about which adults in their lives they feel safe with. Create an environment where mom, help is always possible, where the 2 words are available and the response to them is safety. And if your child tells you something that makes you uncomfortable to hear, believe them. Not because every child is always right about everything, but because the cost of disbelief when a child is telling the truth is a cost none of us should be willing to pay. For educators and administrators. If you work in a school as a teacher, an administrator, a counselor, a staff member, the Calloway case is a direct argument for strong institutional documentation culture. Every concern, every informal complaint, every "I'm not sure but something feels off" that needs to be documented. Formally. With a date and a name. Not because every concern is valid. Not because every teacher flagged informally is a predator. But because the gap that Calloway walked through was made of undocumented conversations. And documentation is the only thing that closes it. Darkness to Light Stewards of Children program is free and available to any institution. Link is going to be in the description. If you're in any kind of school or youth-serving context and your institution hasn't gone through that training, I genuinely encourage you to bring it up. It takes a few hours. It could matter enormously. For anyone carrying something. And this last part is for anyone who is watching this and recognizing something in it. Anyone who is carrying a secret that someone told them was theirs to carry. Anyone who is sitting with something that happened to them recently or a long time ago that they haven't been able to say out loud. What Calloway did was not your fault. It was not the fault of any of the 6 people he targeted. It was not the fault of the parents who trusted him. It was the fault of one man who built a system to exploit trust and who is now in a cell because a 13-year-old girl found the courage to send 2 words at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. You can send those 2 words. Or whatever words you have. To whoever your safe person is. And if you don't have one right now, RAIN's National Sexual Assault Hotline is 800-656-4673. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is 800-422-4453. These are real people. They will answer. They will believe you. You can tell them. Mia told her mom. And Mia's mom showed up. And the investigation opened. And 4 years of a double life collapsed. All of that started with 2 words. You have those words. They're yours whenever you're ready. Alright. That's the story. If this video mattered to you, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content, and this is the kind of content that should reach people. Subscribe if you're new. I put real work into every single one of these and I think you're going to want to stay. The Patreon is in the description if you want to support the channel at a deeper level. We've got extended content, early access, and a community that takes this stuff seriously. Drop a comment. Tell me what hit you hardest in this one. I read every comment. I want to know what you're thinking. Take care of yourselves. Look out for the kids in your life. And I'll see you next time.